Thank you everyone for joining and welcome. Hello, my name is Cynthia Chen and I'm the Manager of Public Policy and Advocacy at WESTAF. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm zooming in today from Palo Alto, California, or lands of the Ohlone tribes. Thank you for joining us for the last of our three-part webinar series of the Arts Leadership and Advocacy Seminar, a program of WESTAF's Alliance Advocacy and Policy Division. Our goal with this learning series is to provide accessible and practical information to the arts and cultural sector about the current landscape of federal arts advocacy and cultural policy. We hope arts advocates leave the ALAS sessions with tangible takeaways that they can use in their advocacy efforts. And before we get started, I want to mention a few housekeeping items. Closed captioning is available for today's webinar. The audience chat function is open, and we will be having a Q&A session with our panelists at the end of the session. Throughout the session, we'll be sharing resources in the chat, so keep an eye out for that. And today's session will be recorded and made available to the event website post-event. You will also be able to access resources and recordings of this session and previous sessions. At the end of today's webinar, we'll share a link to collect your feedback. We greatly appreciate your feedback as it helps us make this programming more relevant to you, our audience. And today's panel is entitled Arts and Rural Development, Challenges, Perspectives, and Opportunities from the Western Arts Advocacy Network. This topic has been identified by the Western Arts Advocacy Network as one of the top advocacy issues for the group. As such, we're excited to gather this panel to help our audience learn more. And today we'll be featuring a constellation of arts and rural advocates who are all working to strengthen rural communities across the US. And with that, I'll hand it off to Andrew Schneider, Executive Director of Wyoming Arts Alliance and Co-Chair of Western Arts Advocacy Network, to kick off our panel and take us through today's session.
Well, thank you, Cynthia. Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew Schneider. I use he, him pronouns. I am an almost 40-year-old white male with a beard and glasses, wearing a blue plaid Western shirt, sitting in front of an off-white background. And I'm joining you today from Story, Wyoming. I'm a fifth-generation Wyomingite from a family that homesteaded here on the ancestral and traditional lands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Crow, Shoshone indigenous peoples, along with other native tribes who call the Great Basin and Rocky Mountain region home. As the co-chair of the Western Arts Advocacy Network, which we lovingly call WAN or WAAN, it is my pleasure to welcome my colleagues Rose and Chris to talk about our group's work on rural arts issues before we turn things over to our inspiring guest panelists, Beth and Kelty. So to kick off our discussion, I wanted to provide a little bit of info. As Cynthia mentioned, our group, which meets in person once or twice a year, came together at the Ucross Foundation Ranch here in Wyoming in the fall of 22 and identified rural arts issues as a specific advocacy issue that we wanted to take up. And that work parlayed into our February convening, the ALAS in DC, which is where a number of us perhaps have had a chance to meet face-to-face. And if not, I hope we will get to do that in the future, where our group had a lot of excitement around a specific piece of legislation, the Rebuild Rural America Act. And so since that time, we've been meeting on a fairly regular monthly, sometimes twice a month basis to really dive into what are the barriers, challenges, and opportunities facing our remote rural communities in arts development. And we began with defining what is rural. And we looked at philanthropy. What are the challenges there? We looked at what is the reciprocity between rural and urban places and arts ecosystems. And then we looked at what beyond Rebuild Rural America Act and beyond our normal advocacy work, what are opportunities for us to advocate for arts in rural spaces? So first I wanted to hand things over to my WAN colleagues just to talk a little bit about their work in rural remote spaces and to help share some of the problems that our group has identified. And then because it's never fun to be on a webinar where we just talk about our problems and never reach for solutions. We will then turn things over to Beth and Kelty, who are doing some really amazing work that gives us pride and hope for rural places in America. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Rose, to tell us what you've seen in the rural field.
Thank you, Andrew, and welcome everybody. It's my pleasure to be here today. My name is Rose Eason, and I am the Executive Director of Gallup Arts, which is an arts nonprofit serving Gallup and McKinley County in rural Northwest New Mexico. And I was asked to share a story from the trenches to start us off. So I just like to quickly tell you all about a public art project we did a couple years back here in Gallup. We painted, I think it's 72 concrete trash cans and planters in our downtown. And that project started because one of the folks in town got tired of seeing the plain concrete trash cans, and his solution was to pick two of them up off the street in his pickup truck, take them home, hire his artist friend to paint them, and then return them to their rightful place. And fast forward a year and 32 artists later, and we have a really impactful public art project fully supported by our city and our downtown partners. In rural America, we can roll up our shirt sleeves, we can work together, we can get things done. But as we'll explore today, it's we don't always want to be left to our own devices, and it would be nice to see federal arts policy, federal arts funding, and rural communities connect more fluidly and to cut through some of the bureaucracy and to take account of some of the challenges. So I would like to share with you a map. And I'm going to do that now. And the story of this map is that Gallup is a small town of 20,000 people. It's what we refer to as a reservation border town located between the Navajo Nation and the Pueblo of Zuni. It is itself 48% Native. It is the commercial hub for about a 60-mile radius, and so that its population can easily quadruple on the weekends when folks come to do their grocery shopping, do their laundry, catch a movie. And on that note, what I desire to bring to this conversation is an emphasis on interdependency and a goal of seeing the rural art space become even more intra-connected. I found that often we speak of rural and tribal separately when we really shouldn't. Of course, tribal communities have their own unique contexts and challenges, but they don't exist in isolation. They are part of broader rural community networks. And that's an understanding that Gallup Arts seeks to promote in Gallup every day. You can fairly describe Gallup's economy as extractive, and that's actually especially true when it comes to the arts. The arts are a major industry out here. A lot of people make their living through the arts, but our poverty rate is well over 30%. We have about 50 trading posts operating in Gallup. All of them sell Native art. All of them are non-Native owned, and most of them have earned themselves a reputation for paying artists as little as 10% of the value of their work. And so Gallup Arts really seeks to intentionally operate within an equity framework and to ensure that all of the funding we receive is reinvested in our community strategically to specifically target issues of equity. And that's something I'd like to see our state and federal policy makers be more attuned to. And I think Andrew will speak more to that in a minute. This unbalanced give and take situation that exists on a micro level between Gallup and its surrounding communities is definitely echoed on the macro levels at the state and regional levels. For us, a lot of the art that is sold in places, or the Native art, I should say, that's sold in places like Albuquerque and Santa Fe is produced in our community, broadly speaking. Everybody I know here goes to concerts, goes to doctors, runs errands in places like Albuquerque and Santa Fe. This phenomenon exists across rural America. We're supplying food, natural resources, labor to urban markets, but there's not a lot of reciprocity there. And I believe Kelty will pick up that ball. And so the last issue I want to raise in terms of this Venn diagram of rural and tribal is the issue of data. And just to state that the way that data is currently collected and analyzed, generally speaking, does not paint the full picture. Gallup's creative economy, for one, is a mostly informal economy, and tribal economies operate a little differently. And so all of our standard kind of formal reporting mechanisms like business registrations or IRS data, they don't fully represent rural and tribal America, and we need to kind of hone in on some of the key needs and opportunities that are missed in that data discussion. And with that, thank you, Andrew. I will turn it back to you.
Thank you, Rose. And I really appreciate you just acknowledging that your own rural and tribal issues extend across the nation into the eastern part of the country as well. And that's really, we're all coming from our individual states, but really thinking about rural spaces across the states and the jurisdictions. And now, from the south to the north, our wonderful Chris Holmes from Montana. Chris, how are things going in rural Montana world? Oh, Chris, I think you're muted.
Sorry, that is a total amateur move. I apologize for that. But thank you, Andrew. I'm Chris Holmes with the Montana Arts Council, state agency. Every state has a state arts council. And so, yeah, I feel that I'm representing a little bit of a different perspective up here in the north, but also a lot of overlap with what Rose is talking about. In Montana, we have 7 reservations representing 10 indigenous nations, and in the tribal communities and also in many of our rural non-tribal communities, isolation, distance, and lack of access is really a challenge up here. So speaking as the state arts agency, I really see our role as to kind of a 3-part role: to educate, to advocate, and to be the connective tissue, to try to connect rural and urban, tribal and non-tribal, and also the layers of organizations and bureaucracies, I guess, and the layers of participation in our community, our ecosystem. I feel that the state agencies really need to and are in a position to educate other state agencies, community leaders, federal agencies about how the arts can be collaborators and really powerful partners in achieving community goals in economic development and in public health and in community livability, in transportation issues, in diversifying the economy and counteracting brain drain, which is an important thing in Montana. I feel like arts and culture workers bring a tremendous asset to all of those issues. The arts are the hearthstone of innovation, but I really feel like in a lot of those arenas, arts and culture are seen as entertainment or decoration or the cherry on top, and not invited into those core partnerships and discussions about who are we going to be as a community? How are we going to manage the changes that are coming to us? What does economic development mean? And I believe so strongly that when you leave artists and arts organizations and culture workers out of that conversation, it's like leaving your Leatherman on the table when you go out to do tasks in the farmyard. You just don't want to leave that important tool behind. So I feel like the arts agencies are the ones with access to create partnerships with other state agencies and also with federal agencies like the USDA, the Environmental Protection Agency, maybe national parks, whatever federal agencies are active in our region. And also other national organizations like AERP, who are very interested in rural livability and are very active nationwide. So I think the more we can do to build connectivity and communications with those agencies and with our statewide constituents, especially in the rural areas, the more powerful this work can be. Montana is really a funding desert. We don't have a lot of big funds that grant in Montana. We really rely on little local community foundations and a very small number of private funders. This may be true of other deeply rural areas like Montana. So another thing that I see that state agencies can do is reach out to funders who are interested in supporting rural work in other areas and try to build relationships with them, let them know who's doing really good, innovative work in our regions, and maybe help build those relationships. We have a lot of very isolated, remote, rural towns who maybe don't have the capacity to build those relationships or even to manage a big federal grant. So I'm also asking, like, what can state agencies, what can the arts agencies do to, like, can we be fiscal sponsors? Can we bring people together? How can we be that connective tissue and spread the message, and also, like Rose mentions, build stronger connective tissue between our towns and our rural areas, just kind of building up that ecosystem. I don't know if other states, if Montana, it feels like Montana is very behind a lot of other states, including Wyoming, in this work, but I don't know if that's true. Maybe we are right in the middle of this struggle along with anyone else, but I feel like this work is very exciting, and we are the people to do it, and being able to have this group to work together and collaborate is really exciting to me. So thank you, Andrew and Rose, for your work, and I look forward to whatever we're doing in the future.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, I will echo that. It has been such a pleasure to have colleagues like both of you to learn alongside and to advocate alongside. And so our commitment to rebuilding rural in our own way will continue. And, you know, before I turn it over to our guests, I wanted to highlight, you know, Rose, you spoke really well about the data and the reciprocity. Chris, you spoke really well about the necessity for interagency relationships to really rethink some of the silos that we're in, and the need for all of us in the arts community to be educating outside of just the arts agencies so that those agencies can support us. And, you know, I think it harkens back to what is the definition of rural. And one of the things that we found is that every federal agency defines rural a little bit differently, and maybe they have different stratas of rural. And those definitions, a lot of them were developed at a time when the Western states weren't maybe necessarily states. And so tends to be maybe a little bit of an Eastern bias in some of those definitions. For our group, we define rural as in relationship to the landscape. And so for a city like Laramie or Cheyenne or Casper or Gillette, Wyoming, where there are 30, 40, 80,000 people, the remoteness of those communities means that they're primarily in relationship to the land, as opposed to urban, which is in relationship to the city. And so we have populations that exclude us from accessing resources, even though the character of our communities could really be said to be more rural and remote than, and I know that that's true for a lot of Western states, as well as rural communities in the East and in the Pacific jurisdictions. And you know, the other thing that we've learned is that a lot of times when you're talking to funders, they're looking to fund urban solutions without acknowledging that rural communities are not just junior urban communities. We're not sort of like communities that are maybe one day going to grow up to be a metropolis. And therefore, the solutions that we're looking for here have to be different. And, you know, the other thing I think that has inspired us in this work is really this lens of philanthropic equity, and the fact that there have been systemic biases against rural artists in the funding system. So we look at an equity curve that says 20% of people in this country live in rural communities as broadly defined, and yet only 7% of philanthropic funding goes to rural communities. So there's a pretty substantial gap. And, you know, I definitely don't think that we can beat up on funders about this. What I'm hoping we can do as a field is move towards finding solutions that work for rural communities and rural artists, and that work for philanthropists and arts funders in the public space. And in order to do that, we need to be in dialogue with each other, and we need for folks to engage us and hear the rural voices to begin to understand what will work for us. So with that, I'm delighted, to highlight two guests today who are providing solutions out here in the rural West and rural South. And the first speaker is my colleague here in Wyoming, Beth Venn. And I know that Beth has her own introduction, but I will just let you all know that she has been in Wyoming less than a year. I think June 1st was maybe her start date, and she is already making a tremendous impact here. Often, as Rose was talking about data, we have to do our own data and our own research, and Beth and the project she's going to speak about has been a game changer in helping WYA move that work forward. So I'm really excited to introduce to you all Beth Venn. Take it away, Beth.
Thank you so much, Andrew, and everyone else. I assume you can hear me. Okay, so as Andrew said, my name is Beth Venn. I use she, her pronouns, and I come to you from Laramie, Wyoming. We acknowledge that Laramie resides on the ancestral lands of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Shoshone tribes, honoring their enduring connection to this territory. So I came here to Wyoming, as Andrew said, not quite a year ago, which is so strange. It feels like I've been here for a very long time, in a good way. And I am the executive director of the Nelchi Center here in Wyoming, which is a center for arts and humanities. It was an estate gift by the artist and philanthropist and collector Nelchi, who gave her ranch and home and studios to the University of Wyoming for their use. And I won't go into too much of what we do at the Nelchi Center, but last year, right upon my arrival here in Wyoming, the Nelchi Center, through the University of Wyoming, was fortunate to receive funding that was part of the WIP program in Wyoming, which is Wyoming Innovation Partnership. This was economic development money that was put aside by the governor back in 2021. And it was originally designed to, and it still is designed to, as I say here, modernize and focus Wyoming's efforts to develop a more resilient and robust workforce, and align economic development with partners that are already working in these areas, mostly university and community college partners, and funding. And it's really a program, a multi-year program that is intended to develop solutions that have to do with entrepreneurship, innovation, and to overall just support and enhance Wyoming's economy, and to, of course, diversify the economy. So the WIP program is every year about a 26, well, it has been in the last 2 years, $28 million economic development program in the state that covers a lot of areas like healthcare, tourism, manufacturing, agriculture, energy, all of the things that you would think. There's also a category here at the end called entrepreneurship. And in the second phase of the WIP program, which started last summer and is intended to go on through this summer, they included in that entrepreneurship category the creative economy. Next slide, please. So there is a segment of this grant that was sort of dedicated to the creative economy and strengthening the creative economy in Wyoming. And we came to call that arts work. The idea that arts work for our communities, arts work for our state, and the work, what artists do is work, and they should be paid accordingly. So we put together a program. It was actually, we were given from the state, we were awarded a grant of $1.1 million to work across the state of Wyoming for a year to really support artists and arts-focused enterprises. From the state's standpoint, what they really wanted was to invigorate this particular sector of the economy, to look at what artists are doing in the state and artists who might be interested in starting businesses and contributing to the economy in various different ways through businesses, nonprofits, other kinds of arts-related enterprises. So we looked to attract to this program artists across all different disciplines. And we did that through a number of different phases within this grant. So we began with artist professional development workshops throughout the state in 5 different locations. We put together a mentorship program that had 33 mentors, both within Wyoming, within the Mountain West region, and nationwide. These mentors would assist the artists who went through these professional development workshops. We put together, and still are in the midst of putting together, a resource hub and ongoing support. And all of this then culminates with a kind of startup challenge to win seed money for new businesses in the arts. So next slide, please. The goal of the Arts Work program is really to strengthen the practices of Wyoming artists, support existing sort of small arts-related enterprises and incubate new ones, obviously to benefit communities of Wyoming through these enterprises, and in a larger sense to contribute to the overall economy, creative economy of Wyoming. So the way this grant was originally written, because it was so focused on economic development, it was really geared toward a startup challenge where a certain number of artists would win money to start businesses, and this was going to be the be-all, end-all, and it was all going to be successful and great. And when we really started to take another look at the realities of these artists working in rural places throughout Wyoming, we realized that the end goal for everyone is not going to be to get that money, though who doesn't want money, right? But we wanted to look at all segments of the creative economy here in Wyoming and not neglect the idea that sometimes artists just want to elevate their practices, understand what their goals are, and be able to meet those goals for themselves. And some artists don't have a larger agenda about supporting the whole state economy. So we wanted to look at all different aspects of this in this first year. So next slide, please. So we began with workshops, day-long workshops throughout the state that were held in 5 different locations. We are fortunate enough to be able to engage a truly, truly amazing artist, Sharon Loudon, who has been working with artists throughout the country. She is New York City based, but she's been working with artists throughout the country and oftentimes in rural areas. She's worked in Wyoming before. She's worked in very rural parts of Alaska. She is also the author of a book series called Living and Sustaining a Creative Life. And in the end, really that was the approach of Sharon's workshops. She talked a lot about understanding one's needs as an artist, setting goals, planning one's career, community building, finding support. She touched on a lot of really, really important things, but I'm going to continue to harp on this one thing. But one of the things that Sharon also did and did extraordinarily well is that she made herself available to every single artist who applied and didn't get into the workshop, and all 20 artists who did get into these workshops in 5 different places. So she was incredibly engaged on a one-on-one basis with artists, and as were a couple of other people, myself and some others working on this grant. And I think it made a big difference. So next slide, please. So as I mentioned before, another aspect of this grant that became very, very crucial to this program was a mentorship program. So we, as I say, had 33 mentors. Some were discipline specific, some were more involved in the business side of things and fundraising side of things. The mentors were, some of them are Wyoming based, some of them are from the Mountain West region, others are just all across the nation. I don't know if any of you are familiar, and I'm not here to promote it, but we used a platform called Startup Tree, whose their tagline is entrepreneurship management made simple. And this was also a game changer for us, you being able to use this platform, because all of the mentors are on this platform with little bios, and you can't really see in this slide, I guess, unless you look really super carefully, but it gives all the different areas that a mentor could help with. And we set up the program in such a way that the mentorship program was free to all 100 participants across the state. And you could log into this platform, look through the mentors, figure out who provided services that you thought would be useful to you. You could connect with them, set up a Zoom call with them, set up a phone call with them. It was a really great way to create this interaction and to make the mentors very accessible to our participants. And all of the participants have just said that of all parts of this program, the mentorship program was extraordinarily useful to them. Next slide, please. So I'm going to explain the Startup Challenge, which is the process that these 100 participants are able to go through, should they choose, to be considered to receive an award of $25,000. So as I said before, it started with the workshops, and through the workshops, we gathered a participant cohort of 100 creatives from across the state. Through the mentoring program, artists were able to decide whether they wanted to move forth to go through with this, the rest of the program, rounds 2 and 3 of the Startup Challenge, or whether they just thought, and I talked to many of the artists who were the 38 who decided they're not going to move forward. Some didn't want to because they realized they're very happy with their artistic lives just as they are. Others thought they just had too much going on in their life to move forward. But we had what I think is an extraordinary number, 62 of the artists decided to go through and present an arts-focused enterprise plan. And of those 62, 30 of them are moving to the next stage. And we're right in the middle of this now. We have the 30 who are chosen through a jury, and the 32 who are not chosen are able to continue to receive mentorship. And many of the 32 who were not chosen to continue, nonetheless, reached out to us to say how grateful they were for the process, just be able to go through the workshops, to be able to focus their goals and their vision for their future. And many of them said that regardless of moving forward with this process, they will be moving forward with their plans to develop, it could be a small gallery, a community space, a film company, a dance company, all kinds of different enterprises through this. So then the 30 who are continuing forth will be able to make pitches to a jury and then develop basically what amounts to a kind of 6-page business plan with accompanying budget. And from those 30, then 10 awards will be given out of $25,000 each to 10 artists. And the other 20 will continue to be tracked and supported through what we hope will be the next round of funding. So that is sort of an outline of the whole process that we've been through with these artists. Next slide, please. I also mentioned early on that part of the grant also stipulates that we will develop a resource hub, and we're doing that in conjunction with the Wyoming Arts Council. They are going to completely revamp their existing resource hub for artists, and we have a new website developer on hand. We're gathering resources from all over the country, really, that can be useful to artists, as well as local resources. We also have provided a number of different forms of networking and support for all of these 100 participants. We had topic advisor webinars that they could sign into over the last 6 months, webinars devoted to developing a business plan, community building, fundraising, all different types of topics. And those are recorded for people who were unable to attend, and they could attend later. We also were very, very careful about making sure we could continue all of the great sharing and great feelings that went on in each of those workshops. So we had in-person cohort meetups after the workshops, like a month later or 2 months later. We also facilitated what we call inner cohort connections. So, you know, there was a writer on the Wind River Reservation who felt isolated and felt that she didn't know other writers. So we connected her, for instance, with other writers in different cohorts, and they ended up getting together and having like a writers accountability group. But this happened, you know, we had a number of different people involved in film and documentary work in different cohorts, and we connected those together. Also people involved in animation who wanted to do animation for film. We also had a person who was a trained voice artist, and we connected her to the film people. So we made a lot of inter-cohort connections, and those proved to be extremely valuable. The resource hub we're still working on, and that will come live, I hope, by the end of the summer. We also set up a number of different, really, really important for all of you who have already said on this webinar that artists feel isolated and they feel like they don't have the connections they wish they had. We set up various ways for networking. We have a Facebook page for everyone in the cohort. We have a Slack channel that's actually quite popular, where people do everything from ask questions of other people in the cohort to posting their most recent artwork that they just developed to sharing ideas, and as well as an opt-in email groups for each cohort. So people could decide if they wanted to be involved in the cohorts, sort of emails back and forth. So we tried to figure out every way we could to solve this problem to the best we could, of people feeling isolated, people feeling like they didn't have groups to be a part of. So that's a big part of what we did in this kind of resource hub and networking portion. So next slide, please. So just to kind of conclude, this was a process, what was phase 2 of WIP, where the creative economy was brought into the larger WIP program. We've only been at this really for about 9 months. So we have a little bit more of this year's WIP funding to continue to use, as well as we hope to be funded again for next year. But we did learn, not surprising, that artists feel isolated. They lack peer interaction and opportunities for feedback. And we started to figure out throughout this whole process that these were issues that we had to address like right away and continue to refine. Also, kind of surprisingly, like the fact that we had 62 of the 100 people continue on through the process made us all who were working on this realize that a lot of artists had many of the pieces put in place to move their practice or to move forward with some kind of arts enterprise. But they had a lot of pieces in place, but maybe not everything that they needed. And they really just needed this to be a catalyst. I talked to one of the participants yesterday who said the most amazing part of this program is that they never thought about issues of sustainability. And like going through this program helped them understand that sustainability is super important to their work. They had a lot of other things put in place, but they were working kind of hand to mouth, working late at night all the time, kind of cobbling things together. And they started to take a whole new approach to their work after going through this process. So a lot of people were kind of just waiting for the right pieces to come together. And this program, I think, provided that. Also, what we realized is, again, not unusual, that a one-size-fits-all approach does not work in these kinds of programs. Like, we really had to tailor what we were doing individually to a lot of different individuals throughout the state, because everyone's needs were different in very, very different ways. And so it was a very personalized approach, and it was very time-consuming, but I think in the end, very worth it. So next slide, which is also the last slide. Well, not quite yeah. It's the what's next slide. we could just, yeah, thank you. So we are anticipating, but we do not know if we will receive the next round of funding for WIP. But if we do, we are going to, we learned a lot of things. And one is that we'd like to begin engaging younger people in this, involving younger people and involving people in the arts at a younger stage in their growth and their career development. Students, engaging them and preparing them with practical coursework, internships. There's a great curriculum at UW called Exit Strategies, and it really teaches like studio art participants, studio art majors, like all kinds of like real world, like what to expect once you graduate. And so we're going to build on that curriculum. Also, the Wyoming Arts Council, we're working with them, assuming we get the next stage of funding, to start a youth arts council. So we're hoping to join with their effort in doing that. Also, in the next round, we hope to do listening sessions, because one thing we learned is that small nonprofits in these rural areas are critical to communities. They are also a segment of the economy that tends to fail with a fair amount of regularity. So we want to do listening sessions, and Andrew and the Wyoming Arts Alliance are going to be included, and really in some ways spearheading a lot of these efforts to go out to communities and understand what the obstacles are for small nonprofits in rural communities and what they really need to thrive and be sustainable. And then the other thing that became very clear to us in moving around the state into rural areas, that a statewide education and marketing campaign to illuminate the value of the arts in our communities is really needed here in Wyoming and perhaps elsewhere as well. But just to help people understand what we mean by creative economy and the ways that artists and the work they do contribute to communities, make people proud of their communities, and uphold communities and make them stronger. So that is the end of my presentation. So thank you all for letting me share that case study of our last 9 months here in this program in Wyoming. And with that, I would like to hand it off to Kelty Garby, who is the Executive Director of Texas Rural Funders.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm pleased to be with you all here today to talk about resources for rural organizations, rural communities. And I'm going to start by giving you just a little bit of perspective and overview on how my organization, Texas Rural Funders, operates. So we started in 2017 as a funder collaborative, and we're 2 years old, actually 3 years old as a nonprofit organization. On the next slide, it outlines that our mission is to mobilize the power of philanthropy to strengthen rural Texas. And so we are a membership organization known as a philanthropy serving organization. And we generate resources and attention toward rural communities and engage in collaborative action. On the next slide, we have 43 members from across Texas, and they range everywhere from small and located in rural areas to large and statewide, and we even have a few national members. Some of them focus on one topic like education or healthcare, and others cover a wide range of topics. So one of the things that we strongly believe is that you should honor, strengthen, and preserve rural communities, because when rural communities succeed, our state as a whole succeeds. And so we take a very asset-based approach to our work. But what makes us a little bit different than a normal philanthropy serving organization is we engage with rural communities and leaders through our program and policy efforts. So what you see up there on the screen is our guiding principles, and I'm not going to read those to you, but I wanted to share them so that you all can see how we think about the work that we do to support and partner with rural communities. On the next slide, one thing I wanted to share with you all is when people hear the word funder or foundation, the first thing that we all think of is funding, and that's for good reason. But people don't always realize or consider that philanthropy can add value in other ways by supporting convenings and communications and technical assistance. And I want people to be able to think about other ways to engage with funders, and the unique value add of philanthropy as a complement to government funding. And so to illustrate this, I want to share a story. On the next slide, you're going to see pictures of a media event in Caldwell County, Texas. And so this was a couple of legislative sessions ago. We worked with an organization called Connected Nation to host a media event. The work in Caldwell County was funded by one of our members, the St. David's Foundation, and they were planning to bring a team to the county to conduct broadband mapping and speed tests with a spectrum analyzer. They were traveling in an RV, and that sounded to me like something from Star Trek. And so we realized that there was an opportunity to explain the process and technology behind mapping and speed tests, and why this is important. Is really what we were doing is taking the work happening in a rural community, and this could be broadband, this could be arts, it could be education, but to elevate that up to the state level and help people understand. And so my goal was to get pictures of the RV that you see, and hopefully to get some media coverage, maybe a newspaper article. And so on the next slide, the event was developed in just under 2 weeks, and we were really proud of the success because we ended up with 2 print stories and 2 television news stories. And what it did, and this is our bringing attention and not only resources, but attention, we had a number of local leaders join for the event. And it also showed to our legislature why broadband was important. So I'm reflecting on, in the previous presentation, talking about a statewide media campaign focused on the role of the arts. So I think the other thing is recognizing our role. We weren't doing the work that was happening in Caldwell County, and it was being funded by our member. But what we did was create an event to showcase that work. And we were able to engage a larger number of media outlets and get more attention than the community would have gotten if it had tried to do their own event. And so I just wanted to share that. And as we go to the next slide, we have 3 areas that we work in. Broadband, we partnership with a media organization called the Texas Tribune to put on a rural symposium that happens every other year. And our newest area is capacity building. So on the next slide, you'll see pictures of some of the publications that we have created in the broadband space, and you can see those on our website. And then the next slide is a representative list of some of the accomplishments in the broadband space. So I want you all to see this is a group of funders working together, thinking about what data does the state need, what kind of events can we put on. That rural legislative training was for communities, and then lots of resources and events. So on the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about the Tribune Partnership at a high level. This is a great organization that provides free content, and the Rural Symposium moves around the state. And when we started doing this, they did not have a rural editor and reporters, and they also didn't have the y'all. That's newly launched as of this past year. So there was electricity in the room when they put on the Rural Symposium because people were excited to be in the company of other people who care about rural. And that's part of what funders are excited about in terms of joining Texas Rural Funders. So I wanted to highlight this partnership to say it happens every other year. It's coming up in San Antonio this November. It's a free event if anybody wants to travel. They also stream it online if you want to watch it. But the work of the symposium actually shifted how the Tribune thinks about their work. So on the next slide, the newest area of our work is capacity building, and how we've dipped our toe in the water around capacity building is to build a grants hub and a set of rural resources. And so this is a screenshot of our website where you can find the grants hub and the rural resources. On the next slide, you'll see that the grants hub includes a list of grants that's searchable by content area, updated every month. And you can either download the whole list or you can search right on the website. We also have a vetted list of grant writers who have experience. And so the idea is you can download that list, and if you find a grant that you want to apply for, and you don't have a grant writer, you can check out the list of grant writers. But part of what we're trying to do here is show rural communities the grants that they are eligible for and save time, because let's be honest, nobody has extra time, but particularly in rural communities, you just don't have as many people working across all the different organizations. So the next slide just lays out the grant list, grant writer roster. And again, the idea is that we want rural communities to be able to access tools, information, and resources. So on the next slide, the other piece of our work is the rural resources. And so this is a screenshot of that. It's searchable in the exact same way as the Grants Hub. And what we're doing is we put out a monthly newsletter, and I realized if you weren't signed up for the newsletter, you wouldn't get access to any of this content. So everything that's ever been in our newsletter is here, and we're pointing to media events that are happening in rural communities in Texas, or really great things from other states sometimes, but also there's data and tools. And so if you go to the next slide, one of my favorite examples of the data and tools is called Re-envisioning Rural America. And it looks at rural communities through an assets-based lens using 7 typologies. And you'll see the centers of wealth and health, energy-rich hubs, all the different examples, recreation and culture areas. This is put out by the Urban Institute, so you would probably not find it if you're a rural community and didn't know to look at the Urban Institute's website. So we're trying to point to organizations and events that benefit rural communities. And on the next slide, there's an example of other organizations reach out to us who have resources. So this one on the left is a webinar we did where there's free books for families in rural Texas, a huge film digitization project, and then a toolkit put out by one of our members with Texans for the Arts on how to use Hotel Texas. The other piece that I want to mention to you all, because some of you may fall into this AmeriCorps NCCC region, is they have free volunteers who will come do direct service. And so again, we're always trying to push out resources that communities benefit from. On the next slide, it's just a screenshot of if you were to look at our rural resources under arts and humanities, here's a few examples of what you might pull up. And then these last few slides, what I want to do is pivot to I recognize that I've spoken more broadly than the topic of arts, but as a person who worked in the arts and education and development before being in this role, I wanted to say to you all, there's an opportunity for you all to stay informed by plugging into a lot of the different organizations, including the one that you're at today. But I included a representative list of some other things you may not consider. The Richmond Fed, each Federal Reserve region does programming, and they put on an amazing, in the Richmond region, rural conference every year. The Kennedy Center, where a place I used to work for the performing arts, has some amazing free arts education resources and people who will answer the phone if you as a rural artist want to talk to somebody and have a peer in a different part of the country. So on the next slide, in addition to staying informed, the other piece is using and helping contribute to data. And this on the right side of the screen, Survey of Rural Challenges, is from a woman named Deb Brown and her colleague Becky McCrary, SaveYour.town. They do amazing economic development in rural communities. And they do a survey of rural challenges that they publish that's open now. But the other thing I want to say is, if you've heard them speak or if you seek them out online, a huge ingredient in rural revitalization and economic development as they describe it is arts. And so I just want to say to you all are the creative engine that helps fund, fuel economic development and get people excited about living in communities. And so you all are in a position not only to help other people understand the unique rural needs, but hearkening back to some of the earlier presentations to think about how do we connect the dots with education, with broadband, with healthcare. And it may seem like that's outside of your purview, but there is an opportunity from a grant making, an economic development, a regional partnership perspective to sit down with some other sectors and figure out how does our work complement and overlap, and potentially get your organizations or your work written into some of those grants. So on the next slide, I just gave some tips for engaging with philanthropy. So just building on this idea of working regionally. And these other tips about doing your research, but not being afraid to reach out to funders. I sit in a lot of meetings, though I'm a nonprofit, with our funder partners. And two things that I see happen are people don't make an ask, and it's okay to ask for things other than funding. Introductions is a really useful tool at times, but I also see people with projects that aren't quite ready. So again, that's the do your research, but engage with funders because they're not going to know what the opportunities and challenges are unless they talk with you all. So on the last slide, I just have some of our contact information. If you want to follow us, and I was excited just hearing about the networks in the previous presentation. We did a survey of our members and found that LinkedIn was the place where most of our members are. So I will also say if you have something noteworthy that you think would benefit members of our network, we love receiving content for our Roundup newsletter, and we invite you to sign up. So thanks for everybody's time.
All right, I'm going to hop back on. Thank you to all of our guests, and I'm going to invite all of our panelists to come on camera at this time. And I know since we started a little bit late, but if you have to hop off at the top of the hour, totally understand. But we did receive a question in the audience chat, and I would, I'll read it out loud to you all, and then if you're able to answer, that would be great. All right, so we have Shenru Yang, who asks about the arts work program. Thank you, Beth, for sharing. This program is amazing. Wondering if you have any program structure content that is open source for those who are wanting to do similar work in our communities. Oh, you're muted, Beth.
So sorry. Thank you for that question. And it's something that we have talked about quite a bit. And we definitely do want to make this available to others, but we're still in the midst of this first phase of the WIP grant. So we're kind of, I think when we get to the end of the startup challenge and the whole process has gone through one sort of phase, we'll be in a better position to put that material together. So, but I very much do want to do that and to share it with others, yes.
Great, I'm gonna look in the chat. Last call for questions. And then in the meantime, I wanted to say thank you to all of our panelists for highlighting the important work that you do in your communities. It's been really great to hear from both Beth and Kelty about some of the work, the solutions that are taking place as we speak. As we heard, Beth's program is still in its first year, but we're looking forward to the results of that program and learning more about some of your findings there. Kelty has pointed to some really great resources about some of the data work and equity folks who are addressing that, as well as suggestions on how to work with funders in rural communities. And it's been really great to hear about that. And I want to make sure that, I'm just going to check in the chat one more time. If anyone has any questions.
There's some in the Q&A, Cynthia.
Oh, there's some in the Q&A. Oh, there are some in the Q&A. Wow, look at all those. Okay, thank you, Rose, for calling those out. Okay, I'll take a look at this. We've got a question from Mid-America Arts Alliance. My organization offers grants to artists, arts organizations, and communities. How would we share our grant opportunities to the Texas Rural Funders website?
I love that question. Just email it to me and we'll make sure it gets on the website.
Great. We'll make sure to send out, is it okay if we send your slides, Kelty? I don't know, Beth, feel free to say yes or no, out to those registrants today?
Sure. Yes.
All right. We'll be sending those out with the recording after this event. So that's how you can do that. Another question, how do we get our county to recognize and designate our community as rural? Oh, I actually don't know the answer to this question. I don't know if our panelists do.
So there, oh, go ahead, Andrew.
I think the question is kind of to what end, and if your county will designate you, that may not have anything to do with making you eligible for federal funding programs, because each agency kind of defines that differently. And then, but certainly you can engage with your county entity. And Kelty, maybe you were going to speak about that.
I affirm what you would say, and the Census Bureau looks at certain definitions of proximity to a metro area and then population. And people ask us all the time at Texas Rural Funders, how do you define rural? And we always say, what are you trying to accomplish? And if you think you're rural, you're probably rural. But the reality is, because so many federal and state agencies use different definitions, what I always think about is, what community are we trying to fold in? And so this is me not knowing the size of your population, but there may be funders out there who would define you as rural, and maybe some government agencies would as well, depending on the size.
Thank you for that very insightful response. As we talked about earlier, the challenges of definition is really challenging because it impacts eligibility for various programs and funders. All right, we've got a final question. We are a creative district located in Evergreen, Colorado, population 9,000, an unincorporated rural area in foothills above Denver. We are a part of Jefferson County, the largest county in Denver. Jefferson County is 90% urban, yet 80% of our community is zoned agricultural farmland. I think this is just a comment, but a very illustrative one of some of the challenges of definition. I don't know if folks have reactions like on the panel, or any kind of comments and thoughts there.
This person from Colorado might already know this. I didn't mention it in my slides, but in Colorado, there's a great model called Rural Philanthropy Days, where the state has been broken up into different quadrants. When that was getting started in Colorado, we also adopted a version of it in Texas. So we have West Texas Rural Philanthropy Days about to happen. And that one in Alpine, Texas, the funders who fund in that region go and provide funding. So I don't know if that's helpful for the person who wrote in. But again, some of it is like, how do you define your region? And I just had a conversation with somebody working in East Texas who's been working hard to get USDA dollars. And this is a funder bringing partner organizations in. And we talked about how everyone, when you say Appalachia, people understand what part of the country you're talking about. And there are parts of Texas that have that recognition in Texas, but there's also room, I think, working regionally or at state levels to work on defining regions. And some of it is like, where do people live and work? And you don't have to follow census tracts always in that case, you know.
All right, I think that's all I see in the Q&A, the chats. I'm going to take this moment to wrap up and say thank you to all of our guest speakers. It's great to feature the WAN Network, Texas Rural Funders, University of Wyoming, and learn about all of the great work that's happening in our region. I wanted to thank WestAF staff, Natalie Sherlong, Britt Howell, for their work and support on this event. And these PowerPoints, recording, and resources will be shared out to all registrants. If you have a moment, we would really appreciate your feedback. And that closes out this year's ALAS webinar series. So thank you so much. Bye, everyone.